All right. What's going on, Mark? I'm over here just shaking off the seawater from my hands, doing some last minute touching up to the tanks. How about you?
Ah, man. Normally when you set up a new tank, it's exciting, it's fun, it's a journey, right? There's a little bit of cussing when you're doing the plumbing, always. Um, but this second tank I set up, even though I think total tank volume is 75 gallons
Mm-hmm.
compared to like a 180. And then the other funny part is, it's a water box, right? So it has all the plumbing and the sump. It's an all-in-one, right? It's made me more frustrated than my tank upstairs where I had to do all my own plumbing with PVC. I had, choose and research and buy a sump and figure out where I was going to put everything. Um, and let me preface that, each moment where I contacted Waterbox for support, they're super nice and super awesome and super helpful. Like the first obstacle I ran into, do you want me to get into this real quick?
Yeah,
Um,
I just wanted to say, like, I can't imagine calling customer support for like a tank and stand. That just seems weird, right? Like, build a stand, put the tank on it, fill it with water. I can
yeah.
imagine calling customer support for a lot of other things, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and
man,
I mean,
by all means,
I have DIY plumbed a lot of reef tanks, right? So it's not like what is this something or anything like
no,
that.
if you're having certain experiences, for sure, there's going to be lots of listeners who who have come across that same challenge. So tell us about it.
Well, so backstory is I wanted, I think everybody heard I had to move the tank to the basement. Upstairs became kind of a playroom. Kids got a little older, didn't need the playroom, so I moved the tank back upstairs to the main floor. COVID happened. A lot of us are working from home, including me. I was like, man, I kind of miss having a tank in the basement. So I thought, well, I'll set up a smaller one. And I really wanted something shallow. I really like shallow tanks as of late. And I would have gone through my local fish store and done another Planet tank, but it just didn't make logical sense because the dimensions I wanted, like Waterbox made the tank already, right? Like for me, the only thing I didn't like was that ultra clear glass, which I've harped on quite a bit because I'm a klutz with my magnets and stuff. So I scratch the crap out of those ultra class, soft glass things. Anyway,
That bougie glass.
that bougie, yeah. Anyway, first things first, like the return plumbing. I had a Red Sea tank at one point, and they've got kind of an interesting solution to plumbing that's because they don't want people dealing with bulkheads and all that. The water box, you've got the standpipe, then you got a piece that goes through the hole, and then you got another piece, and so there's a total of four O-rings, right? Which I thought was kind of wacky, but the part in the middle that connects the two pipes, like I couldn't get the sump plumbing attached to the bottom of it. So they were super nice and they overnighted me a new part, right? Like they didn't have to overnight it. So because it was Saturday and I'm ready to set up this tank and now I can't because I can't plumb the return plumbing. So I had to wait till Monday. No biggie. The other thing is that the doors go all the way down to the bottom of the stand. So the only thing keeping the doors from touching your floor are those tiny little leveling feet. And here in the basement, I have carpeting. Upstairs, I have, hardwoods. But so once you added water weight to the tank and the tank sinks into the carpet pad, I couldn't open and close the doors. And I'm like, how did I not key into that when I was researching this tank? Like, why didn't I do a lot of research. I read like every review. I go on the forums, and nobody mentioned this. And I was like, what the hell? So then I had to go to Home Depot, buy a piece of plywood, paint that white to make it look nice, let that dry, and then I put that under the tank so that those little leveling feet are sitting on that. Um, and it looks okay, but now that vision you had in your head has been tainted a bit. Now you got plywood, and it's just not what I was going for. So I was a little bummed out about that. So yeah, those kind of ups and downs were kind of frustrating. So then, where I thought I would save some money is to reuse my old AI Hydra 52s that I just have sitting in a basement box. But as you know, the lenses, the UV melts out and browns out. So I ordered some new UV lenses from AI. I watched a YouTube video to swap them out.
Quick question: you change out just the lens over the UV, or is it a cluster? You change the whole thing?
Yeah, just that circular
Okay, so
cluster.
you have to change
Yeah.
the whole cluster.
Yeah, and so I ordered a bunch of those, and but I mean, I was like surgical with this thing. I was gentle, right? I'm scared of electronics, like when you get into the wiring and stuff. And for some reason, after I did all that, now some of my whites don't work anymore. And I took it apart and I looked at soldering and made sure I didn't break any solder joints or anything. And it all looks perfectly fine. But so now my tank is really blue on one side and really white on the other side, and they're parent-child synced, right? So it looks like crap, and I'm like, damn it! Now I got to think about replacing the lights that I thought and lights aren't cheap, so I was really like, oh man, I can repurpose those old lights because I'm just gonna keep some LPS, right? I don't need. So I have an old Hydra 26, so now I think I'm gonna maybe find a used Hydra 26 and then just because that's all I don't need the 52s on an LPS tank, right? Um, and I think that might be cheaper than buying. Like I'd love to put Kessels on it or something else, but I'm already in deep with the tank and stuff, and lights are expensive. So anyway, so it's a little frustrating that every step I'm just getting screwed over. And then I've never had a filter roller, so I put one of those on, and I just realized I put the roll on wrong. Sort of like the toilet paper thing, like what's the right way? I did it like a toilet paper roll, but it's supposed to go the other way, like roll to the outside. And so the damn alarm keeps going off because I think there's too much tension on the roll. So I'm an idiot. But anyway, but so
I'm over here just smiling because this is why we both started Reef Therapy, literally to talk out our highs and our lows. And what you're sharing just crystallizes part of the experience of doing a reef tank.
Yeah.
Especially setting up a new tank. It takes a long time before you have enough experience. I'm not saying you don't, but as far as like setting up lots of tanks before you put something together that like really matches or exceeds your vision. If you set up a tank every few years, you forget to think about little things like putting the stand on the carpet and having doors that extend all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, and like I said, they were when I called them. Another thing was the stand in the photos has a dry side, like a divider,
Mm-hmm.
and the stand I got did not, and that was a big reason why I went for that side, the 48-inch over the 36 inches. It's like, oh, I love having a dry compartment for all my outlets and stuff.
Just as an aside, people always ask me, "Oh, what's the best tank? What's the best tank?" I'm like, "Man, the glass box is pretty much the same. What varies a lot more is the stand features.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about the dry side. Usually put a chiller and all your electronics and power supplies over there. Maybe your dosing, just keep everything isolated from there. And one thing I loved about my 6-foot Peninsula from Waterbox is it had doors on both sides. So
Oh,
I could just,
yeah.
I really love that. But you're totally right. I just love the part where you're like, you picked this setup because of the stand, and then you got it, and it didn't have the features that you earmarked for yourself.
Yeah, and I messaged them. I'm like, do I have the right stand? They're like, yeah, we made a design change, and I could harp on them and say, hey, dude, update your pictures then, but it's not a big deal. There's bigger problems in the world. These are first world problems, but it's just
Sure,
the
but if you
honeymoon
order
phase, right, of your tank is kind of diminished. It's like,
Yeah.
okay.
No, you're absolutely right. There are some manufacturers that make small design changes that they think no one will notice. Or, if you ordered a black car and you ended up with a red car or a white car, that's not what you purchased. This is one of those reasons, like, I really get annoyed with improper coral names, common or Latin names. I'm just like, what other field? Like, you can't go around selling zucchini as bananas.
Right.
You can't sell tomatoes online and then ship somebody strawberries. But
It's
for
a
some reason,
slippery
you can,
slope, right?
you
Like,
can absolutely do that in the aquarium hobby. So it's like, yeah, this is a first world problem. We don't want to make a stink and be a Karen about it, but also You were really looking forward to that dry side.
Well, I had it in my Red Sea, and so in my brain, I was like, I'm gonna completely replicate the wiring I did in my Red Sea, and I had my doser in there, and so I was like, oh, that's nice. I don't have to think hard about where I'm gonna put everything. The silver lining is if I ever want to change out the sump, right now I have all the room in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could put a 40-inch sump down there if I wanted to, but it's just those little gotchas along the way just frustrated the hell out of me, leveling the thing, all that. So, finally now I have the tank up and running. And then the lights, I screw myself on the lights. And so I was like, man, come on, like I need something to go right here. I set up a little 3-gallon tank because I needed to set something up while I was waiting
You're
for
over
that
there
part.
just like reefing your life away.
Yeah, I just last weekend I was like, oh, okay, we'll ship you the new part. I'm like, well, what am I gonna do this weekend? I had an earmark to set up a tank, so I set up a Pico, and I pulled out. Remember the old Innovative Marine sky lights?
Oh my lord.
So I had
Yes,
one
oh
of their
yes.
strips, but it's all white LEDs, right? So that's my other project is I'm gonna solder in some blues to
Mm-hmm.
give it a little nicer spectrum because this was an old algae light I used, so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't care about the spectrum, but. So yeah, I've been tinkering away. Nothing, no Reef Builder studio level, but I've been, I've been goofing around. So how
Did
about
we
you?
did we talk about the tank move yet?
Tank move. Oh,
Um
you're the acrylic?
yeah.
No, I watched
Oh,
the videos though.
okay, so I've put out the videos and I've done the articles, so yeah, so I've been reefing so hard that like last week I literally needed a break. I just needed to breathe and just kind of observe. So Friday, 10 days ago, I agreed to adopt a full reef tank. It's a really interesting acrylic aquarium. It's 42 inches long, 36 inches wide, front to back, 30 inches tall. It sat on a black acrylic stand, and I heard that the tank was 15 years old. And the only reason I even went to look at it is because there was a yellow tang. I was like, that's how far I'll go to get like a wild, perfect, flawless yellow tang. So I get there, and I've just fell in love with the dimensions of the tank. Like it's just such a cool big box.
Yeah.
And I knew it'd be a lot of work, but I agreed for 3 reasons. One, getting that yellow tang. Two, I really enjoy the dimensions, and the 15-year-old tank had been taken care of really well. So it looked a little closer to like 2 years old. I ran a blue line pump, an ASM skimmer, VHO lights, still VHOs. And just like a normal reef community, some zoanthus, gorgonians, leather corals, a few shrooms. So when we're tearing down the tank, I got a good look at a big old regal blue tang that I didn't even know was in there, that I didn't see it the first time. And just an amazing, super tame marine beta. He eats flake, yo.
Nice. I
This
saw
is
him
a
in the video, by the way. I was like, oh,
This
a
is a
nice grab.
maintenance account, with well, it was a maintenance account by DL Reef. So shout out to Parker and Danny who helped me facilitate that. So it ran an automatic feeder with like the most rock hard ocean nutrition pellets you've ever seen. I saw some spilled on something we were canning around. I was like, what is this clay pellets? What are these things? I didn't even recognize it as food. And they were like, oh yeah, we spilled some food from the automatic feeder. I'm like, what the heck? And so, for those who've kept up with the videos on YouTube on the official Reef Builders channel, we moved everything, and everything's going fine. We got battery-operated air pumps. We got corals in one bucket, fish in one bucket. All the corals kind of wrapped in towels so they don't dry out. And we pulled everything out of the cargo truck that I rented for the move, and I had to get it back. And so we just moved. It was a sunny day but cold, so I set the stand down, and we went to just take lunch. And when I came back, it had just like spontaneously cracked, along one side. And so
Yeah,
like
that's nuts. I saw that video, and
it's
that's
15 years of stress plus
yeah.
being in cold air in the hot sun. So I didn't really mind. But what was going to turn into a one-day job, I was like, oh, Okay, well, this tank's not getting set up today.
Yeah.
I didn't like the stand anyway, so we ended up doing a part one on the video move, part two on setting up like an emergency kind of saltwater pond to hold all the livestock. I just happened to have a 100-gallon trough that was just perfect for all the rock, corals, fish. Did a video on that as well because I feel like there's not if you have that situation and you need like an emergency setup, there's no online guide on what to do. So threw all the rock in there with a bunch of aeration, one power head, just a maxi jet. An actual new maxi jet, and one of the Seachem's smallest skimmers resting on the rocks, and just happened to have that Kessel AP9X kind of hanging over it, and it was just like perfect. It was a beautiful little setup. So did a video on the tank move part one, a video on setting up the saltwater pond part two, a video. So when the tank stand broke, I called the only guys I knew that were really into like building stands. So I called up David Wellman over at Keeping It Reef, and I was like, hey David, can we build a stand tomorrow? And just like boom, sure enough, just went to the shop and knocked out a really cool new style design for a plywood stand using lots of glue and kind of like finishing nails, and just ended up with a much nicer stand. And so now the only thing that's holding me back on doing that setup is buffing the tank, because now that have this opportunity, boom, all right, let's do a video on how to buff a tank, an acrylic tank, because there's always big, like poorly taken care of acrylic tanks, like practically free if you just pick them up and get them out of somebody's way. And if you know how to buff, I mean, you're talking about like $50 to $100 to $200 investment depending on the depth of the scratches, and next thing you know, you got yourself a 100 to 500 gallon acrylic tank just for the work. It's kind of crazy.
I've always liked sorry, I didn't mean to, but like the Seachem, or not Seachem, it was like the System 2 acrylic tanks or something like that, like the built-in wet dries. I always wanted to pick up one of those in a small size as a Q tank, right? Because it's great. Like you get the wet dry oxygenation, but yeah, pick up a scratched one and just buff it out.
Ooh, I should mention, that in the middle of doing all this, a couple weeks from this recording, we're going to have a Reef stock for the first time in 2 years. It's going to be really big. We have lots of great companies. I've been hustling like basically the entire aquarium catalog of raffle prizes. Name a product, we probably have it in our raffle. And just answering lots of questions for the vendors and the speakers, and just lots of coordination. In addition to making sure like the studio looks as great as it can, because I'm sure invariably some folks will want to visit. And I just always say, like, we clean up the studio for ourselves. It just so happens that we time it for Reef stock. And then right before this recording, I was just looking at my main acro system, and God, the only problem I'm having is corals getting big and falling over their pedestal, like the weight of a table acro just lifting up a 4-inch limestone tile. And so like I've been gluing the tiles down to the bottom of this acrylic like a coral table. That's a good problem to have. I've relocated the giant clams to the sump, threw a A360X over them, and it's actually kind of cool because it doesn't obstruct the clams at all. You can look down, and because you're behind the light, the clams can't see you, so they don't close up at all.
Oh,
and
nice.
so I actually have room for a couple more clams in the sump, so I'm thinking about pulling out the big blue squamosa out of the Red Sea Peninsula, which is doing beautiful, but like the coral growth in there is starting to obscure the views of the blue squamosa, and that blue squammy is going to look way better top down.
Oh yeah.
It's like the dream big blue squamosa. So I'm going to leave the 3 big clams, the Dorasa, Gigas, and Hippopus in the sump for a few months, and make sure everybody's happy with that setup for now, before I move the blue squammy. That's kind of my baby. He's never been exposed to anything else outside of that, the tank he's currently in. And I aquascaped the 400-gallon tank.
Nice. Yeah.
And what was, so I built a platform to go over the ductors emanating from the bottom-mounted closed loops. And what was really freaking cool was using a combination of Carib Sea life rock, cornerstone branch rock, and Maraca rock. And as soon I was so the left side looks amazing. It looks like a really natural pile because you got some of the lumpiness from the Carib Sea Life Rock, and then you have these thick branches from the Cornerstone, and then you have these more detailed branches from the Maraca by Tropic Eden, and it looks, something about it looks like spookily natural. Right, because when you're on the reef, like there's parts that are grown by Posloporas, there's parts that are grown by table acros, and there's parts that are grown by staghorns. So the left side looks awesome. Right side looks a little goofy because I just kind of shelved it out, and because that's going to be all staghorns. So
Yeah.
the left side looks cool as a rock pile. The right side looks very goofy because it's going to be all staghorns growing from basically the bottom of the tank to the top of the tank. So it's a 30-inch deep tank. But anyway, I got it going. I put a 60 breeder in the sump. It's going to be my starter sump. And the only thing I'm still trying to work out right now is the siphon break. Because a lot of manufacturers who are clearly not hobbyists, they drill the return holes like far below the drain holes. What the freak are y'all doing? Anytime I see that, I get really kind of
You're talking
upset.
about like where it's a exterior overflow box, and then they drill it. Yeah, yeah, I've noticed that too.
The Innovative Marines, they have the same issue. First of all, they both had 2 returns. It's like, you don't need 2 returns, just 1 return. Like, stop complicating stuff. So I blocked every, half of the returns on my Innovative Marine ones, and then I used some lock lines and a flared nozzle to basically bring the outlet of the return all the way to the top. And so the gap between kind of just, the return hole and the drain went from 2 inches to like half an inch. And so I need to figure out a way to elegantly inject a siphon break, just like a little hole or something. But yeah, otherwise, like, my tank's really quiet. It's full of very purple rock. And it's full of fresh water. I'm just gonna let it rinse. I'm not planning on doing much more in the next, I don't know, month or two, at least until after Reef stock building a nice light bar using the electrical conduit that I like to do and painting that white. But I'm definitely going to work on building up one side of the tank at a time.
Nice.
Right, because I'm probably what I'd like to do is put 12 XR15s, because I'll be able to spread them out and angle them and position them where I want a lot more than just 6 XR30s. And that's going to be a little while. But I did figure out a system that I'm going to use for transferring corals where they are to that tank, because I don't want to ever introduce like anything. Never an Aptasia, never a Valonia, never any hair algae. Like cyanode, diatoms, dinos, that's kind of inevitable. That stuff is in the air. But if you never introduce hair algae, you never introduce Valonia, it's going to be a lot of work up front.
Yeah.
But I think down the road, it'll be freaking amazing. Like, imagine it's impossible for there to be Valonia. Like, it can't magically appear, if it's not introduced.
And in a tank that size, dealing with a pest is such a different ball game than
because it'll explode first before your tank kind of evens out. So my plan is, I've got the 60 cube with a nice little external overflow box. That was my tank at my old house before the studio. So a lot of corals actually emanated from there. So I'm going to plumb it in line with the system, going through, like, I think it's 100-watt UV. Somehow I ended up with 2 100-watt, aqua UVs. Like, they're like 3 feet long. So I'm going to plumb all the water feeding that tank through the UV. So, like, anything trying to get into that tank will be irradiated. Then every acro that I'm going to put in there is going to get dipped. Then it's going to be put in there on maybe like new bases. And, I'll observe them for a couple of weeks and just with the mesoscope, like, get really freaking close and make sure there's no buggers and, go through a series of dips, and then they'll get planted on the rock. So no bases. And that's like an annoying challenge because a lot of these corals have encrusted, and so I'm going to have to pry them off their base and just, really disrupt them. But I really feel strongly that down the road, it's just going to be super awesome. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be very tedious. But yeah, that's one I biggest challenges right now is just having too many corals that they're, I mean, certain colonies, when they get big, like digitata and different monoporas and acropora, not so much acros, they have a strong skeleton, they just rain. The skeleton they just break off and they just rain over here and they fall down over there, and I find little bits of corals every freaking where. And I'll tell you what, man, if I had access to the back of this tank, and it actually arrived with a closed loop, and it's got the PVC bottom. If I had to do it over again, I would put the closed loop on the back, and then I would love to use Two Little Fishies Reborn as a substrate, because that was one thing I did in a tank at Aquamart like 10, 12
I
years
remember
ago.
that tank, actually.
And it had so much flow, and we didn't ever have to touch the substrate because it was just like just a field of coralline. It locked everything together. But every time a tip of anything fell into that coarse aragonite media, the coral bones, it just grew because it wasn't tumbling around, and so it just like encrusted onto 2 or 3 pieces and then just turned into a little coral on the bottom. It was really amazing. But because the intake is on the bottom, I'm not going to do that for this tank.
Yeah, I have a large. They don't make the old school, or I can't find the old school Reborn anymore. But I have a large sized substrate. Right, I have some of the new Reborn on my 180 as a substrate, and then some other kind of crushed corally size. And I think it gets a bad rap because when your sand bed is literally just a substrate similar to a rock skate, your tangs graze the hell out of it. And so, all these people dealing with cyano on their sugar-sized sand, or dinos, dinos also, plague your rocks and stuff, but just like that unattractive sand bed, it's like when your bottom is just more little rocks,
an extension of the rock skate.
Yeah, your bristle-tooth tangs graze the hell out of it. So I always have a decent-looking substrate. Mm-hmm. And then everybody's, dosing nitrates, so it's like, I dose nitrates, but don't put crushed coral in your tank.
Everybody's dosing nitrate?
Everybody's
dosing nitrate now?
Let me just say, I see it pop up everywhere on every YouTube channel, every forum. And it's funny because, I can imagine somebody being like, yeah, I dose a little nitrates, but, you shouldn't put crushed coral in a reef tank because it causes nitrates, right? It's sort of funny like that.
If you know what you're doing and you know how to balance that out, yes, you won't ever have to dose nitrates because your pet sand bed is expelling all types of CO2, making sure to keep that pH nice and low for you, and, slowly releasing all the nutrients that it's absorbed over the months or years.
And it's super easy to gravel back like a 1/4-inch layer of crushed coral. It's not hard. Anyway, but yeah, it's funny you brought up the live rock. I have, in the theme of doing crap I've never done, right? I was very anti-filter stock, but I used to be more, I want to try that new methodology, right? And I kind of got into cranky pants, I'm just going to stick with what works for me, but. One, it's fun to try out this filter roll, right? But the other thing I never did was I never used branch rock. I just never did. And so, I did branch rock in this tank, and it's fun, man. That stuff just locks into place like a kid's toy builder set or something.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to interject for a moment that I see a lot of great looking rock aquascapes that I hate. I hate people making their rocks look good, because the star of the show should be the coral.
Yeah.
Right? So when your rock is so crazy and dynamic, people are not really thinking where they're going to put the coral, where they're going to put the coral. And, so that's why my rockscape in my Cade aquarium looked so dumb. It's just a straight flat shelf from top to bottom. Now it looks amazing, just covered with LPS, literally, resting vertically. And then, so same thing, I was just thinking about those different zones where I'm going to put different corals. Dude, there ain't going to be one limited edition coral in there. I mean, it's just going to be big, beautiful, fundamental, corals that grow well.
Well, it's funny when you were describing your 2 rockscapes in your larger, your 400-gallon, and how one's kind of hokey, but it's with an intention of what's best for the corals that you're going to put there. And it's similar. There was this temptation to get all artsy with the the branchy stuff. But then I realized like, what am I going to be putting on this stuff? And then if I take a picture of the tank, it looks really boring in a photograph, right? Whereas if you walk up to it, you can kind of see the method of the madness and say, oh, okay, I can see how you're planning to have these different layers of corals. Anyway, yeah, so it's that we talked about in the past, right? Like all this NSA stuff, and it looks cool, but if you're doing a fish only with live rock, well, then it still sucks because your fish have nowhere to hide. But in the end, think about what you're trying to grow, right, and how it's all going to come together.
It's it's that instant gratification factor.
Yeah, it's something to look at while you wait for the 2 millimeter frags you get these days to grow in.
Granted, I have 12 other reef tanks to look at, and I'm not gonna be happy with the 400, and probably till like end of summer.
Yeah.
Like it's going to take a while to process the corals that I have and make sure they're as clean as possible and start populating all 8 feet of the tank. But like, oh my God, when I get these corals out of where they are right now, I got all these staghorns that just want to grow straight up. So I had to do that actual grafting experiment the other, last year. Now they hit the surface, I've stopped caring, because I'm like, yeah, form your little microtoll, go ahead and die off and get your little pillow of cyano on top. It'll just be so easy to snap off that tip and just get it growing again. I'm not even I mean, when you get corals really dialed in, you don't worry so much about saving every scrap and every millimeter. Like it's just like tending to a garden. You have to do some grooming to stimulate the kind of growth and shapes that you want.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, me, I throw corals into my backyard and they become lawn art or, little sculptures in my mulch bed because, well, I mean, it's the same like trimming up a tree or, that's the way I look at it sometimes. As long as I'm still growing a piece of it, I didn't kill any. I didn't necessarily.
That's fine. I found a giant colony of red echinophilea. It's like 15 inches across on a rock with another chalice I don't remember, and then on the top of it was just like a full colony of fox flame. The only reason I think Tommy, Tropical Pet Oasis, is going to bring it over if he hasn't sold it already. Wouldn't blame me if he did, but it was too big to like put in anything in a bucket, and like you'd have to bring over a bin, and I didn't have a bin with me to put it in. But yeah, no worries. I found a colony of fox flame, and hopefully I'll be able to add that to the mix. Yeah, you would love how I've kind of mentally scaped out the 400 because it's just like one of those ID guides to Acropora shapes.
Nice.
We're going to put the staghorns over here, and then we're going to put the bottle brush staghorns over here, and then the table corals are going to be kind of in the middle. We're going to put all the digitate ones at the very, very top, and in front of them is going to be, the corymbose corals, and then mostly on the ground, in front of that mound, it's going to be, kind of wild card. And the thing is, the tank will be so bright and so much flow, like there's no way that deep water acros could live in there. I say that, but I did have some Suharsenoi in the tank at Aquamart from 10 years ago, the one we talked about with the substrate. It was very pale. It was very pale, but surprisingly, it actually grew pretty well.
You did an old, I want to say it was on Reef Builders, an old video of that tank long ago, right?
Oh, yeah. There's a few videos of them, but you know what's funny? I remember... after that tank had been around like 4, 5, 6 years, I still remember like the last time I filmed it. While I was filming it, I was like, "This is goodbye." It was a store tank. I was only hired to just take care of that tank, and I could just feel the end of that experience coming to an end. But yeah, so it'll be very interesting to set up an acro tank that's only suitable for like half of the species that I keep.
I was really tempted to do an acro tank in the basement, but I'm just on a LPS kick, and not the LPS that everyone's going nuts over, because hammer corals really mess up my I get a reaction from them, so that's kind of nice. It means I stay away from all those overpriced torches, but yeah. And I mean, before we get into like the main topic, I wasn't trying to harp on water box. I mean, when you buy something online without getting your hands on it in a store, right, these things happen, and they've been really, anytime I posed them a question on their little chat, they were super helpful and super nice, so I wasn't trying to talk smack. It was just those little gotchas kind of built up over a week where here's
an important gotcha. say someone is, has something labeled as, God, what was I going to go with? Goniopora. Nice red Goniopora frag. And you get it. And maybe you grow it out for 6 months to a year. And it never develops the long tentacles that you were hoping for. And then later on, you discover it's actually Bernardpora. Short tentacle Goni. Very different behavior. Not nearly the flowiness of a full-on Goni. You could put like, even if you're like moderately experienced, you could put a year of growth and conditioning and nurturing into a Bernardpora that's never really going to have shape and never going to really throw tentacles super high like a typical Goni, but it was labeled as a Goni, right? So it seems like nitpicking, but like when you have a vision or a very specific expectation, you might, it's just not cool. It's just not cool at all.
I made peace because if I had ordered it from Planet, it would have been a non-standard tank, right? Either I compromise on because I really liked that exact dimension, and I could have compromised and picked a different tank, but it probably would have cost me more, to do it that way. Because anytime you come into a tank company like Planet and say, I have custom requirements, right? It's like, okay, it's going to take 2 months. And
it's like, let's pull out the calendar, flip a few pages.
Yeah.
And here's the expected date. And then you might add a couple more pages. And by pages, I mean months to the actual, arrival date.
And my 180, which was a standard rimless size they made, but I just wanted the overflow box in a different position and shorter. It took 2 months, not the end of the world, but in 2 months you're going to be here and I'll be like, oh, I don't have that tank, I'd rather I wanted some instant gratification, right? So
yeah, no, anyway. I think you're going to really did you get the Claire C Gen 3?
Yes.
With the rollers everywhere?
Yes.
Okay, so that is a new improvement, and I have one like half set up, not actually running, and I know that is where it likes to lock up. Or it used to like to lock up, and that's why they put those rollers in there. You're lucky you didn't have to build it. Before it was just like a flat. It came in a box, but everything was just disassembled, and it was like.
Yeah, but their instructions had like thumbnail-sized pictures. Like it should look like this. I'm like, where's my magnifying glass, right? So I ended up pulling up like a YouTube video on how to do it, but yeah.
You're gonna love it. It's should be a lot quieter, for the drain. Whether or not you have a continuous siphon drain, it helps to quiet everything down. And you're not really going to appreciate it until like 4 to 6 months down the road. You said a 75, so at your flow rate, man, you should change that filter roll twice a year. When you go twice a year, and you're like, holy crap, man, like. Let's say, magna time. You're like, oh, it's time to change that filter roll. Or it just finally starts beeping at you because it's like the roll's empty. And then you realize how much less detritus is in your tank and just how much cleaner your equipment is. I'm not a stickler for mechanical filtration at all. I know that a lot of the particulates and the waste and the detritus will just kind of coagulate and like fall out of solution in some place where you can kind of get it. So I'm not worried about like having that crystal clear water. I just want to keep all that scum out of my protein skimmer, out of my return pump, just, keeping them quiet, keeping them performing as needed, and reducing or increasing the interval as far as doing maintenance on it. So I think you're really gonna love it, especially for an LPS tank that's 75 gallons. You'll have a long time between filter rolls.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because I did my about face about coral feeding a bit, in our last talk or maybe the one before that. And I the goal of this tank being shallow, part of it was I want to do that top down kind of fun. But the stars of the show are corals that I just want to put on a sand bed, some flower pots, some trackies, some cinerinas, and I want to feed them, right? But I don't want to have to go up to my armpit to feed them. And so leftover food getting skimmed out by this thing, and I don't have to worry about it. But still, I can probably keep it somewhat nutrient rich. So I'm intrigued, and the downers, if I really like it, then it's probably gonna commit myself to redoing my big tank. Yeah, it's a neat piece of kit. And everybody listening is like, yeah, welcome to 2015. But
no, I know that at the end of it, you're gonna have your own kind of unique flavor. That'll be a combination of old school and new school, and it's going to be a great looking display. I'm sure of
Oh,
it.
I'll tell you what else I liked about it is that the elbow on it, it accepts the 1 inch US pipe, but it has
Yes.
a smaller, like if you keep pushing the pipe in, it supports the DN25 piping that comes on
Hmm.
Red Sea tanks and water box tanks. And I was like, this is great, because I had some leftover.
I mean, that's after 5 years of having a first and second generation out and not having that feature, right? So
Yeah.
I did notice that too, that it had the two standard sizes in the elbow. I'm like, that's awesome,
Yeah.
5 years later.
Yeah.
But speaking of corals that go in the sand bed, this is a special request to our viewers and our listeners. I was looking at my UNS tank that has the fox coral, and I swapped out the bubble for just crazy awesome elegance coral, not color-wise, just health and vitality. And I've got the Lobactis gutteri in there, just a little purple fungio with green tentacles. And I was looking, I was like, oh man, you know what would be really, really good for this tank? A slipper coral. So I went
Oh,
online.
yeah.
I couldn't find any. Nah,
Really?
I couldn't find any. Yeah, really. Yeah, really. Tidal Gardens, culture some. And it's like, all right, whatever, $200 a frag. Okay. I feel like I could get 3 slipper corals shipped in a box direct from Indo for less than that. I mean, no offense. I'm sure they're great looking specimens. But yeah, so I am on the lookout for some slipper coral. I don't care the color. And Halomitra, which I know you grew forever, and it just grew too big for you because you didn't frag it. But yeah, two
Yeah, that's a
corals.
feed me Seymour coral, man.
Two corals I really want are Halomitra, polyphilia. Hit me up, jake@reefbuilders.com if you have one or know where there's some just sitting around. Because yeah, I love the fungid group, and my list of corals that I want but don't have, species wise, is smaller every year. But that's a couple that I have yet been able to add to my collection. Oh yeah, and if there's any orange tongue sitting out there, just let me know about those too.
I still have my orange tongue, and then I got the green. I don't know which genus, but it's a slipper-esque coral.
Does
Because
it
I
have
wanted.
lots of little tentacles with like little bright tip at the end, or is it just green?
It's like just this weird, just monotone green.
Yeah, it's probably green Herpelotha.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
the orange guy. So the only difference I notice when I do elicit a feeding response is on the orange guy, I have lots of little mouths, whereas the green one is just like one mouth, but he's just very elongate. So
Huh. Well,
interesting.
I'll see him in a couple months when we're out there
Yeah.
for Aquatic Expo.
You can school me and tell me what I got.
Oh, you don't need that much going.
Nah.
All right. Well, that was awesome, like just kind of reef conversation, but we need to be responsible content creators and talk about aquarium. It's not aquarium regulation. It's marine life regulation.
Yes.
And I would preface this part of our session by saying that I entered the hobby 94, 95, and it was just like a few months on the heels of wild Caribbean rock harvesting being banned. And I remember clear as day just scrubbing some Oceanic 60 cubes, and the owner of the store would tell me, oh, the hobby's going to get shut down in 2 years. So I've always kind of entered the hobby with this shadow. I've always been the shadow. Oh, they're going to shut us down. They're going to shut us down. I'm like, what are we doing that's so wrong? Providing truly sustainable income to impoverished third world nation communities that actually live on the reef, and we're adding value to the reef. Why would they shut us down? And there's just always been this, I don't know, just this fear, this absolute fear about things being shut down. I don't remember exactly which year it was, but part of it is
The live rock thing? The
no.
Florida
That was straight mid '90s. I don't know
yeah.
exactly
It was
which date,
I can tell you
but
the
I don't
year
know when
'cause I
when
bought
CITES. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say 95 is when I set up my first legit reef tank, and it was with wild live rock from Florida, and it was like one of the last shipments. Like the guy was going out on this boat, and he was like, "Oh, this is the end, man."
I don't remember. I wasn't aware when CITES was applied to stony corals, but we're all aware of the threat on an ecological level facing coral reefs. And coral reefs are built by stony corals. This is why names matter, because we're only talking about stony corals right now, right? And so all stony corals are CITES regulated. And I don't know that they need to be. Last year there's a paper came out estimating that there was 500 billion corals in the ocean. Just let those zeros sink in. 500 billion. Not million, not billion, trillion. And that was reef building corals. I don't think they were even counting like deep water corals, And for sure, like in some instances, like the corals are suffering, but it's not individual corals, and they're lumping all acros and montes in their own genus, but not individual species. And so it's like you're talking about tens of millions of colonies of Aquapora locani in the wild. We're not targeting those. They're a little deeper water. They're really spread out. You'd have to do some serious work to do a dent even on like a local scale. So CITES is the Convention for the International Trade in Endangered Species. And any species that gets CITES listed has to have a CITES permit issued by the exporting country. And this covers, as far as aquariums are concerned, all stony corals, soft corals that have a rock on the base, giant clams, seahorses, I think maybe they're CITES Appendix 2, so maybe they don't need a permit, but they're definitely like, being watched. Clarion angelfish, like just a single species, which is weird. It's just so weird because we don't even harvest them. No one fishes them. We don't collect them. All the clarions in the hobby these days are being bred in Bali, on literally the opposite side of where they normally occur. But some others, iconic species, freshwater, the zebra pleco, you have to have a CITES permit to transport that across international boundaries. And then same thing with the Asian arowana, for sure. So because there's a lot of paperwork associated with getting our favorite corals, I think that just keeps this specter of fear, looming over people who operate in the trade. And oh my goodness, I can't even. There's so much stickiness that we can't really get into because we want to get to the heart of it. But also recently, Fiji was shut down, then Indo was shut down, and then it's opened back up. But then it's also going to be sunsetted. The whole industry in Indonesia for wild corals is going to be sunsetted in 2 or 3 years. I don't remember exactly which year. And then we've had these issues with Queensland coral export from Australia, and then the EU banned 5 groups of corals specifically from Australia. So they're okay coming from Indonesia, but not from Australia. And I don't know why there's so much attention being placed on some of these corals, right? Okay, so Australian scoly, all right, yes, I think there's a really big number of those being collected. But like Duncan's and Elegans corals that are super hardy and grow real fast, like why, there's not data to support it. Oh yeah, forgot about the Hawaii shutdown. And so yeah, there's a lot of threats to the hobby, but it's not like one gate's going to come down, right? It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
And to be honest, we're not really seeing it yet. Like hobbyists don't feel it. Most of the price increases right now are due to freight. Right? The cost of air freight is just skyrocketed, and so like a coral that sells for $2 out of Indonesia, I'm just using a number, will land with a overall price tag between packing, CITES permit cost, inspections, and freight. A $2 coral now lands for $15, right? At the importer. So then that's going to be sold for like $30 at wholesale. So what used to be a really common slipper coral that would sell for like $30 to $40 now is wholesaling for $40 to $50, right? So there are a lot of regulations surrounding the hobby. Most of the time it has nothing to do with aquariums, the whole regulation side of it. Nothing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the what's interesting is a lot of the proposed regulations, they don't even factor in the aquarium industry in a proper way, right? Like they don't factor in that there's a ton of mariculture, a ton of aquaculture. When they wanted to put, things on the endangered species list, they completely were oblivious to the fact that species was being aquacultured at a grand scale. But now you're impacting somebody in Florida with a farm that's aquaculturing these because they can't sell and distribute or move them across, state lines. And you're like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like the medicine wasn't the right medicine to apply to the illness, right? So I, th- I, in a sense, personally speaking, if I saw over time restrictions on the collections of wild corals, whether it's merited or not, right? Whether we actually, we could argue till the cows come home that we are not the biggest impact to coral reefs as a hobby, right? There's tons. I mean, we talked about all the other ways that reefs are just being destroyed by man. But if those restrictions came in with stipulations that allowed for mariculture, right? Like that took in the big picture of like, well, maybe like Indonesia, you brought up example, like we don't want you collecting and exporting wild corals, but mariculture farms, fine. And if mariculture farms need to get broodstock, fine. I wouldn't be walking around with a picket sign if that happened. I'll be honest, I'm not going to lie, whether the science and the data proves that us allowing wild collection makes an impact or not. I have an icky feeling about it sometimes, right? Just the general vibe of like plucking something out of the ocean versus like something coming off of a mariculture farm.
No, let me stop you right there. I feel very strongly about this.
Okay.
There's another word, I might have mentioned this before on the podcast. When we're growing corals here and reducing the demand for corals from the nature, whether it's wild or maricultured, you can consider that biopiracy, because you're disenfranchising the people who are, that's their natural resource. And we're literally adding value to the reef, whether they're farming or wild harvesting. I'm telling you, there's so much reef out there, and we want the small corals. We don't care. We don't touch the giant breeder colonies.
Yeah.
We're talking about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. For some reason, it's totally fine to just wholesale extract, thousands of metric tons of seafood of one species.
No, I
in
agree,
one
yeah.
ocean. And I know that the Western perception of environmentalism and conservation is don't touch that. But how are you going to say that when we've already wrecked all of our reefs, when we've already plowed all of our our wildlands, not all of them, but you know what I'm saying. And then we go over to developing nations and be like, oh, no, all that stuff that we've done over the last 200 years that we don't do anymore because it's all dead anyway, you shouldn't do that. Don't step on the grass. And by grass, I mean actual corals in the shallows. So there's definitely like this colonialist perception on telling developing nations or, reef communities, reef nations, what to do with their natural resources. Coral farming or coral harvesting is not the problem, right? Coastal development destroys the habitat. We're not destroying habitats.
Yeah.
People like to use examples of cyanide and dynamite fishing. That's not our fish. Okay, cyanide is. Some of the cyanide is, but it's mostly caught for food, That's not us. We want good, healthy, small specimens. We don't want large breeder specimens, which is exactly what sport fishers do. But like sport fishers, they get their quotas. They get sizable quotas. So nothing about sport fishing. It's a very expensive sport or pastime, and those kind of people know the right kind of people to make sure that they're not harmed. Like for example, how are you going to differentiate between the people who are sport fishing in Hawaii, catching big, top level food chain stuff, big breeders, and then you're going to discriminate against the artisanal, like hand collected fish, of the small specimens? Like, it doesn't make any sense. The science does not support it. But
in the same sense, right? If you use CITES or like the Endangered Species Act, you restrict that organism not just from the hobby, but also from overfishing. You protect the environment that the organism lives in, right? Now you can't cut down the forest that the endangered owl lives in, so you take out a lumber industry. But that solution may have a more even-handed, like, we're not just targeting the aquarium hobby, but it unfortunately impacts us in a way that the aquaculture and the mariculture gets negatively impacted too, right? Where we're like, hey, we're breeding the hell out of these clownfish, like, don't put them on an endangered species list, right? So
there's a perfect example, and I don't want to say it was like 2012, 2015 timeline. I want to say it was the Center for Biological Diversity was suing the U.S. government to list some like 72 species of stony corals that technically occur in U.S. territorial waters if you're counting like Guam and like certain areas of the Marianas.
They had euphyllia on there, I remember.
But they were doing the whole like snowy owl thing, right? They didn't care about the corals. None of those people knew what those corals were, right? They were wanting to sue the government to list those as endangered species. Then they would have to force the government's hand for climate change, right? You're talking about like transforming the entire economy and way of life by getting a few corals listed on the Endangered Species Act. And you're like, come on, man, that was weaponizing the legislation. And unfortunately, you know who gets paid no matter they win or lose? Lawyers, man.
Well, and
no offense to any lawyers listening right now. I know we need you guys sometimes. But, you know, just the legal process. I'm like, when I've put all those pieces together, early in my career as a aquarium journalist, I was like, this is gross. This is not what this tool was designed for.
Well, and I think hearing a lot of other people talk about this Lacey Act amendment, that's what they're going at, is the would and the could of the folks behind it and what their real intent is, right?
Can you take it from the top and just kind of rewind about 2 weeks and just kind of really introduce like the meat and potatoes of what we want to get to?
Yeah, and I'll do my best not to insert the speculation. There's a lot of speculation going on. So there's the America Competes Act, right, to make legislation that was supposed to be about changes that make America more competitive in the world space, is how I interpret it. But you know, because you have China and all these other countries kind of stepping in into certain areas. So there was an amendment to the Lacey Act, and the Lacey Act, help me out here. I'm trying to.
So the Lacey Act,
the original Lacey Act, not the amendment, but.
So I'll do this part.
Yeah.
Lacey Act was some legislation to give teeth to enforcement in the protection of endangered species. So, for example, if you're smuggling, I don't know, snowy owls or pandas or something, the law enforcement, I'm sure there's someone listening who's just like, oh, that's not quite right. They could seize like everything associated with that process, right? The phone you use to make the calls, the computer you may use to make the arrangements, the boat or the car or the truck or whatever. I mean, they just really go after everything that was involved in the perceived crime. And that, so the Lacey Act is, you know, it's the sharp end of the stick, basically.
Right. And then under the America Competes Act, there were some amendments added, sponsored by Senator Mark Rubio from Florida and Senator Schatz from Hawaii, right? And the wording, I forget, you know, the seedy underbelly of people that might be pushing for this. Let's just take it at, you know, surface level. The wording is about making some changes to reduce the importation and also transportation across state lines of species that are considered injurious to like native habitat, to people, to agriculture. And, you know, I don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes, but I can understand that a senator from Florida and a senator from Hawaii would have something to say about invasive species.
So you're talking about the amendment to the Lacey Act, and one word that's just kind of annoying, just kind of irritating, is injurious to what native wildlife or something. It's like, why couldn't you just say harmful? And that's an example of, I feel like, legalese that might be purposefully inserted to alienate and just turn people off to reading the document in the first place. I swear that's why that word exists.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think through, like, maybe the lawyers are afraid that if you use the word like harmful, that there might be some wiggle room, or there that might, the definition of harmful might offer some, but might offer less wiggle room than saying injurious. But I
Who
don't
says
know.
injurious in everyday speech? I've never
Yeah,
heard. I
it's
don't. Nope.
well. The other thing that was weird to me was prohibiting the importation of any species of wild mammals, wild birds, fish, parentheses, including mollusks and crustacea.
Ooh.
Like,
Okay.
did they
Those are my
not take
favorite kind of
biology
fish.
class? Next thing you know, they'd say dolphins are fish. Amphibians or reptiles or the offspring or eggs of any species.
I
No
don't
mention
think
of coral, right? Cnidarians are not covered.
Right.
So cool. We'll just keep a bunch of coral tanks.
The
Um,
thing about it is, as we talked about with the CITES, we already have like multiple layers, right? There's certain countries that just don't allow
yeah.
harvest of marine life. Like you can't really do that in Mexico, which is weird because we get fish from the Mexican coast. And then it's up to their discretion whether they even permit people, and then it's their other discretion if they issue CITES permits, right? And then it's just we already have so many layers of regulation. For sure, this first of all, this does not shut down the aquarium trade or any pet trade, but it affects all of us: reptiles, birds, exotic pets, insects, and everything about aquariums. But it leaves like an opening for like a really quick change of the status quo. And so on the one hand, I really just disappointed with the lack of kind of professional organization of the aquarium hobby overall, especially the saltwater aquarium hobby. After all these years, I feel like when you flip through the pages of old family magazines, there was the APPMA, AMDA, American Marine Life Dealers Association, and another one for pet products, marine aquarium products. And nowadays, like, we don't have anything. We have one little kind of lawyer on retainer for the entire aquarium hobby, but they cover the entire pet hobby, Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council, PJAC. And it's just not enough. Fiji would never really been shut down if, we need to be swimming upstream. Like there's this conversation goes in every single direction. If we're not constantly lobbying to defend our cause and promote our cause of education and conservation and what we really believe, we're just always on the defense, and we shouldn't have to be. This is
Yeah.
true, but there's people who believes that you should not even have a dog and a cat, like no pets, no animals, right? So I don't know where this amendment came from. Most people's understanding is to try to stop the spread of invasive species, and I find that a little bit rich. After hundreds of years of like cross-pollination, so many invasive species in Hawaii,
Yeah.
so many in Florida, across the entire United States. There's no such thing as a native earthworm in North America, right? But they've been here for so long that we just take that for granted, and it's like
Horses
humans
are not native, right? But there were plenty
no,
of
no,
wild.
they were native, and then they got hunted to extinction,
Well, okay.
and
Yeah,
then they
fossil
came
record.
back
Yeah.
in.
No, I agree with you on that. Because Florida. I mean, so if I'm being honest, right, or if we're all being honest, has the hobby been responsible for introduced species? Yes. Has the reptile trade been responsible? Yes. So as an
Has
outsider,
agriculture
yes,
been responsible for introduced species?
has
That's like
goods
all
and
caps,
services
yes.
imported from China. Every summer now, my house is invaded by Joro spiders, which are like, if you know what a golden orb spider is, they're big, kind of freaky looking spiders. They're pretty, but they're sizable that if you're kind of fearful of spiders like my wife is, I kill like 20 every weekend in the summer around my house, right? And they came in on goods imported from China. The what are those flies up in the northeast? Shoot, they have the spots on their wings. They came on a stone shipment, right? Lantern flies. So to your point, but two wrongs don't make a right, right? Like we played our part, right? There's Oscars in the swamp south of me. There's peacock bass. I mean, we can debate lionfish if that came from ballasts of ships, but we can't debate the fact that there's Red Sea and Indo-Pacific tangs like swimming around in inlets, in Boca Raton. So we did play a part in invasive species, but it doesn't make sense to go on a national level, because who cares if somebody has a Red Sea purple tang in Michigan, right? Maybe you care if it's in Florida or Hawaii. And those states have laws, right? I think Florida passed legislation that bans lionfish, right? Hawaii, you can't keep a reef tank.
How are you going to ban lionfish after they're now already the most common predator on Caribbean reefs? It doesn't make any sense. Like these knee-jerk reactions to things that have already happened. All right, we don't want to.
They're all over the Bahamas now. It's crazy. But anyway,
we don't want to get too much on a soapbox. But like I was saying, the aquarium and marine aquarium hobbies are not that well organized legally. And so on the one hand, I was discouraged by that. But on the other hand, the wording is so open-ended that it affects everything, right? And I know that the reptile people, dude, have been dealing with this stuff like much longer than we have. And so they are really well organized. I'll encourage you to look up a video from USARK where they really talk about this. And this is not the time to like sign an online petition. This is the time to email your senator. So the Competes Act has already passed the House, and I think there's going to be like a 2-week recess, and then they have to figure out the budget, and then they're going to be looking at this Competes Act. Call your senators and get them to, tell them how you feel about the amendment to the Lacey Act under the Competes Act, right? Don't be polite. Explain where you're coming from as a hobbyist or a professional. Like if you have a store or you're in the aquarium business, like you should first of all be very much really abreast of this. Like you should know what's going on. You should have already called your senators or emailed your senators. And online petitions aren't going to do anything. This is one of those few times like we all need to show up. You gotta show up for the roll call. We have to inundate our respective senators and explain to them why this is actually really bad. And it would cost a ton of jobs if this one amendment, dude, I'm in over my head on this legal stuff, honestly.
No,
if there's one amendment, if someone just like says, no ornamental marine ... And it's just so open-ended, just like this amendment, that it could just, I don't think anything's going to be shut down, but it could bring it to a grinding halt for long enough that it will cause severe damage to a lot of people's livelihoods.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer either, but I tried to read this and interpret it the best I can, but there is hope, right? Like the Secretary of Interior has less than, if it passes, I'm saying, I hope it doesn't, but the Secretary of Interior has to define minimal quantities, right? So if something is imported in minimal quantities, right, then those things could be covered, right? So he might look at betta fish, like freshwater betta fish, right, and say, okay, we're importing those in this amount, huge quantity from Asian fish farms.
Has to be millions.
Yeah, and we don't see a problem with invasive species with this betta, right? So some of these, some stuff might be grandfathered in, or maybe that's not the right word for it, but it's just there's too much vagueness in it all, right? I mean, the fact that you're lumping crustaceans and mollusks as fish, it's just weird. It's just really weird. But I'm trying to hope that the intent is just trying to curb invasive species on some level, not all levels, and hopefully
future invasive species, right?
Yes.
Like again, I think it's
super lionfish. Who cares at this point?
It's done.
And then also, I would hope that there's some revisions, right? Like that they kind of go, oh crap! Like, what do you mean my daughter can't buy a betta fish at Petco, right? Oh shoot! Okay, we're starting to see that this thing needs a little more more granular, definitions. So let's pay these lawyers some more money,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, yeah. So I personally think this isn't the one that's going to get us because, to your point, the reptile industry, the bird industry, I mean, everybody's behind this. So even if we don't have our act together, which we don't as an industry, and I know it's, easy to point fingers and somebody could reply back, well, Mark, what have you done, right? But I think there's enough behind this, right? But it's also worth taking an attitude of like, how can we be better, and say, look, we support regulation that makes sense, right? We wanna do our part, but this doesn't make sense, right? And let's show you all the cool things we are doing in this hobby with mariculture, aquaculture, how exports were managed, by fisheries. But the bigger thing is like something is coming at some point, right? I think to your point, death by 1,000 paper cuts is definitely
Absolutely
our future, unfortunately.
So in closing, I hope we've alerted you that there's something important looming, and it's just really hard to wrap your head around it. The clearest discussion I've seen on it is on one of my favorite reptile YouTube channels, Dave Kaufman's Reptile Adventures. If you go to YouTube, search Lacey Act info panel. They streamed a panel that's about an hour long, just really detailing this. And like I said, the reptile people have so much more experience dealing with this. It'll give you a much clearer picture of what's going on and what you need to do. I think Coral Magazine and a lot of other outlets have covered it. And to be fair, like, I'm just so tired of reporting on this regulations in the aquarium hobby. I just want to reef, man. I just want to talk about pretty corals and shiny new equipment. Like that's my jam. And show
That's
off.
why we spent 40 minutes talking about reef tanks because we don't want to talk about this.
Yeah, we are not the source of information for this, right? We did our superficial research, and we know that there's something important, and we have a little bit of time to deal with it. But if an overwhelming number of people contact their senators, we might be able to move the needle. And in this case, that's all that's needed. Just change the wording to really identify maybe what's the invasive species that they're trying to prevent. Meanwhile, given us safe passage for the overall pet trade, not just aquariums, not just saltwater.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that, I'd like to assume everyone who listens to this probably thinks like us and would never dump a bunch of fish in an inlet or a lake. And
one important point. The wording in the amendment to the Lacey Act would prevent you from traveling across state borders, right? So don't even think about like new animals being imported. Talk about moving from one state to another, and you're not able to bring your fish, coral, tarantula, pet sea otter, or whatever you have, right? So it's like incredibly strict. And this is one of those few times I'm like, I really think that falls to the state by state, because like you said, there's no environmental harm to having a purple tang in Michigan, or Alaska for that matter.
Like I want to say Georgia, it's you're not permitted to keep piranha, right? Like I've never seen them in fish stores around here. I could be wrong about that, and someone could correct me in the
I'm sure
comments.
you'll find them at certain shops.
But yeah, I could mail order one pretty easy, I think. And I remember when I moved out west, it's like I saw people with piranha tanks, and I was like, but it's like, well, yeah, if you dump these, I mean, where I live, piranhas could not survive in lakes here. We get pretty cold in winter, but as a state, right, South Georgia, it might be a different story because we have a big old swamp down there. But yeah, I honestly think that makes sense, right? If I got a killer job offer and moved to Hawaii, I would move to Hawaii and I'd give up a reef tank, right?
You'd have a fish tank.
Yeah, I would have a fish-only tank, and I'd be responsible with the fish that I keep and not dump them in the ocean. If I'm done
you just have Hawaiian endemics.
Which would be kind of cool right now, yeah.
I was like, you got a little bit of HLLE? We'll let you loose and go collect some of our own.
Yeah. It'd be kind of cool if you could keep some native corals that are. I mean, I know you can keep which are not corals, but zoanthids. But it'd be kind of cool if you could do that. Anyway, that's tangent. But if Florida got strict, and I don't want to piss off Florida reef keepers, but I'd be like, okay, I kind of get it. That you don't want me to live in Miami and keep maybe some exotic things that are considered potentially dangerous. But even then, I don't know. You think about all the fish farms that are in Florida, right? That breed tropical fish and ORA and
besides the ornamental and hobby aspect of it, there is a lot of careers and a lot of jobs and a lot of incomes tied to this, not even just aquariums. So I'm just going to say it one more time if you're still listening. The Lacey Act info panel on Dave Kaufman's Reptile Adventures. Go just search Lacey Act info panel, and I think that those guys, they really spell it out for me, and it's kind of like where I got my distillation of what's going on.
And if we do see a call to arms in the sense that this hobby, you see maybe certain industry people, or you start to see some positive change in organization around these things, support them. Like I mean, I can sit here and say support PJAC, but I'm hoping there's more than that for us to support in the future, right? So
the PJAC has their hands full. They're covering the entire pet industry.
Right.
I am assuming that this is one of their top priorities right now, but it would be really nice if even both aquarium sides of the hobby could get together and have their own lobbying group. I feel like that would be really important, and that's
not just for legislation like this, but also just PR, right? We need to show all the cool stuff we're doing in this hobby and how much it's changed for the better, and how much we're aquaculturing and mariculturing today than we were 20 years ago, but you could even say 5 years ago, right?
Absolutely. Or adding to science, I'm always looking at Google Scholar and new species description. I mean, they're describing all kinds of cool stuff from aquariums in Europe, Asia, and America. So we're contributing to science and improving society and the knowledge of humankind, and that's my speech.
And that's why you should also know your coral names.
Yeah, your real core names.
Yeah.
Because if you show up and it's like, hey man, don't be touching my purple monster or my big R Walt Disney tenuous, it'd be like, what are you talking about, bro? Walt Disney is down the road.
All right.
I know this wasn't our smoothest discussion of something, but it's just really important. We need to educate ourselves, and to be honest, man, even if we dodge this bullet, we didn't dodge the Hawaii bullet, right? Hawaii shut down, Fiji shut down. But we just don't want that to happen internally, and we need to get ourselves a sharp stick for the entire hobby that is going to increase our positive public relations. Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, we did some housekeeping. We talked about Reef for a good while. This was a good session. I'm sorry to hear about some of your challenges with your Reef tank, but I hope you get over the hump and you enjoy some of the newer amenities of your current new tank, because your other tank is only like a few months old, right?
Yeah, which I should have just kept that old tank. I was like, I don't want two tanks. And then, a year later, I buy another tank to replace the tank I sold, and
well, I hope you really enjoy that Clarity. I think automatic filter rolls are just kind of a no-brainer in the future in terms of keeping our tanks clean. And I hope maybe a couple months down the road you're like, I really want one for my big tank.
Yeah, that would suck though, because I don't even know how I would install one on that thing.
We'll figure it out. Well, thanks to everybody for joining us. If you're any state or within Colorado, any state near Colorado, make sure to go to reefstock.show for our upcoming event in a couple weeks, March 5th and 6th. It's going to be a really great time. Raffle prizes, coral market, some awesome speakers, and most of all, it'll just be really great to get together and talk reef the way Mark and I do on the Reef Therapy podcast. So thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll catch you guys in another session very soon.
Thank you. Yeah, see you next time.